right, welcome back, guys, to the Improvement Season podcast with me, the German guy, Pascal Flor, and on the other end, it is the one with a good accent of the two of us. That is
good accent.
Yeah, the good one.
I always find being English, I find it so boring. It's just like,
I always find it so. That sounds a little bit weird. So attractive. Like every single time I hear a proper British accent, I'm just like, that is good. That is just so satisfying. I don't know what it is, but it's just music to my ears.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah.
How are you anyway?
By the way, I always wanted to, so when I was learning English back in the days, this was the time where I actually read Harry Potter as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like massively into UK, and I was like, oh man, I would love to have a British accent. Never happened though, unfortunately.
I've always wanted
American, like proper Southern American.
I've said before to, I don't know who I said it to several people, I'm terrible at accents, which I think is partly why I'm terrible at languages. I just two and two go a bit together. I don't know why. I'd actually go and do well, I don't know if I would, but I like the idea of going and doing courses to like learn how to speak an accent, because it's just so invaluable for like taking the piss out of people. It's like with Jacob, I can't do an Australian accent to save my life.
But only for this, you're then going to actually take courses, like just to take the piss off people. Have you ever seen that guy? And probably it popped up on our YouTube feed because I was watching him. This is a comedian from the US, I think he is. A very smart individual. And he is like comedy shows with freestyle raps. And it is incredible. He is like asking the audience, like picking just random words, right? Okay, give me a word. And they need to be very, very like weird. It doesn't need to be something like just a typical thing, because then every single time he raps, it's always the same, but they need to be individual, right? And creative. And it's unbelievable. Fuck, what's the name of this guy again? Just try to find that, and you will probably find that, like comedian freestyle rap. Holy shit, when I was watching that for the first time, I was blown away in the sense of like, okay, how's that even possible? And then there was a video popping up where he held a presentation about how he learned that skill. And it's more like, okay, we all know when we are reading, we can jump over words and we can still make sense of sentences. And for me, when I'm rapping, it's like you need to let it flow. You are not thinking about it, right? You just let it flow, because rhymes, you have a certain structure of rhymes that you can teach and learn yourself. And then after that, it's like just let it flow. And I think that is the hardest part, and just let your mind get carried away and do the work for you. And it's just like, holy shit, that is crazy. This is a skill and not just like learning accents also.
I guess that makes sense, because it's like, I guess it's even like when you learn a language, when you're first learning it, you really have to think about every word.
Yeah.
But now you speak English, you don't think about, you just talk, it just goes. Like learning an exercise even. I remember learning like, I don't know, like hip hinges or something. And now it's like, I can't do a hip hinge wrong because my body just won't let me get in that position. So it's super interesting. And I wish, you see people who are so skilled in those areas, and it's super frustrating. So that was your latest YouTube. This could be a thing.
Chris Turner.
There'll be some Americans who know him.
Out. It is absolutely crazy. Like, honestly.
I was going to say, this could be a segment of the podcast, our latest like random YouTube views.
And that guy, he looks like someone from The Big Bang Theory.
Okay.
Like a total kind of a nerd, right? But he's super funny and fantastic at rapping. It's crazy.
A lot of comedians are like that, aren't they? Like super intelligent. You're just like, okay. Like they go to Harvard and Cambridge and stuff. So
yeah. Also, when he was rapping, there were people like bringing up quantum physics things, right? And he was like, holy shit, you're like, and then explaining that. And he was then bringing that into his rap with then connections and stuff, which was absolutely crazy. I mean, yeah, must be a super smart guy. I mean, just from the perception of things.
My latest YouTube escapade, you know, when you watch a video, even it can be a client check-in, and at the end it gives you suggested videos. I hate that because sometimes it really gets me. There was one, I'd been watching dog tricks, obviously, to help with Ada. And there was a video, it's like the 20 most dangerous dog breeds. And it just went through them all. And this video has like millions of views or something. And I was just like, oh God, this is not a good quality video.
I had a time where I was doing this exact same thing, but more so with, what was it again? Some dude who put up like strange and mysterious and horror videos, like the top 10 horror things that happen in a house. And that guy was talking super boringly, and everyone was complaining about that, but everyone loved that about him because that was his style of actually then talking about those videos. And there was a time where I was just hooked on these things. It's just like, I don't know, like a daily soap. It's produced super badly. You know that it's not real, and that it's just like, I don't know, idiotic to spend your time watching that. But I was just hooked, and then I got carried away on just like continue watching videos after videos.
I guess in some ways, maybe it's something like South Park or something. Did you ever watch where it's just 2D? It's terrible, really. But actually, it's quite, the script and everything can sometimes be quite like topical and funny. So
anyway, I mean, so just a short update on my end, because I would rather like to talk about you this week. My back is feeling better. I didn't need to end or stop the cutting phase. So didn't need to go into a maintenance phase, what we've kind of discussed last week. I was still able to train on that weekend, got back to the groove of things. Once again, I can still feel it, but it's much, much better now. And it's good. Momentum train is still eroding, which is a good thing.
It's
now
really good.
In the 84 kilogram sphere after like 2.5 weeks or so, which is very, very cool.
Nice. It's been like this the last while, actually, where you've been on point, and I haven't so much been on point. Actually, it's how the times of it's changed, hasn't it? The tides have turned, or whatever the phrase is.
Just look back like exactly 2 years with the Improvement Season podcast episodes. It was completely the opposite.
Yeah. So first of all, I have to introduce Excitable Edgar. For any of the listeners who are watching. So anyone in the UK will probably know the John Lewis advert. I just thought he was current with the time of year, so we've got him. He's hopefully not going to blow any fire on me, because that's what he does. Anyway, so on my end, it's more of the same. I guess the most relevant update is I saw the GP yesterday, and I always hate to say this because I know how hard it is even to become a general practitioner. Like, you have to go through 7 years of med school or whatever it is. So I know how intelligent they are, but whenever I go, I always go there wishing for more. And I'm like, I feel like you didn't really know. So it was frustrating in that respect, because I felt like I was, you feel like you're controlling the conversation and like saying like, this is what it is. And you feel like you shouldn't be the one doing that because they should be telling you. So, but anyway, he basically told me to continue. I'm on omeprazole. I don't know how to say the name. So it's an antacid. So he said, continue taking that. And he basically asked me a load of things. He couldn't identify what it is. And I've got an endoscopy. I want to say it right. I keep wanting to say endoscopy. Endoscopy. So this is where they put like a camera down your throat and look in your insides for. I looked it up, and I think it said it is like, it can be an hour-long procedure, which sounds horrible because you're awake the entire time. You're just like with your throat up. So that's not going to be much fun.
Have I ever told you about my heart MRI? Where I was laying in the MRI scanner for an hour as well, which normally when you get some MRI scan, it's like 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, I've had MRI.
And that was the entire hour I was waiting for signals such as like, okay, hold your breath now. And this is something that I needed to do like an entire hour, where I was needing to hold my breath for like 10 to 20 seconds sometimes, and then breathe, hold my breath again, and that's for an hour. That was already like super, super annoying.
I relate mine at least to being like the dentist where you get work done. It's probably going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be having your mouth open for ages, but it's short-term pain for hopefully identifying what's going on down there. So that's booked in, and that's actually 2 weeks Friday. So 2 weeks tomorrow of this recording, which is awesome because he told me it was going to be months down the line. The one that's months down the line is the, what's it called? The ultrasound. So to see whether or not I'm pregnant because I've got morning sickness and fatigue. That's what it feels like. He was just like, yeah, let's get an ultrasound as well, just to check what else is going on down there. So yeah, hopefully they identify something.
Oh God.
Dog humans.
Yeah.
It'd be beautiful.
Very adorable.
So I'm deloading this week, and then next week I'm maintaining. So I'm going to do like a single week of primer phase, and I'm hoping by that point things might have settled a little bit. I might feel a little bit better because to be honest, maintenance calories compared to surplus calories for me weren't very different. It was like 4,000 versus eating as much as I could up to like 4,200 to 4,300. The weekend that went, I think we should probably talk about that a little bit actually, where we were filming and we were in Nottingham. I kind of just ate to somewhat hunger and just made sure to eat, but I ate for 3 days. I think I averaged maybe 3,500 calories, which is probably quite a bit of a deficit for me. So I have lost a bit of weight, but it's kind of like the mental strain of having to force feed is getting very taxing. Like I haven't eaten anything today apart from a mass gainer shake that I drank this morning. And even that was like, I don't want to eat. Like I know I need to eat again because I need to get some protein in and not be in a huge deficit. And I just don't want to do it. It's just really frustrating. So that's getting like just mentally wearing. But I'm more, I just want to get into the gym and start training again and feel good. So we'll just see. Like I said to you, and like I'll predict it here as well. I think as I get into the diet, as I get into a deficit and my kind of focus shifts, and obviously being hungry, like not hungry is a good thing for the deficit, and eating, I don't know what deficit I'll set up, but it'll be a fairly restrictive one because I'll look to lose pretty quick. I think I'll start feeling better quite quickly because I think if it is anything acid reflux related, certainly being on the bigger side and eating lots of food is not helping it. So that may alleviate symptoms. I was just going to ask
because you thought that it was solved over the weekend after you actually took the medication for acid reflux, and now you feel like dirt once again.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was a bit, basically, I'm very thankful, like I said last time on social media, because some people have had similar symptoms to me and they were messaging me and they gave me some advice. Likewise, when I put up that I was taking the medication, I got messages of people saying, oh, you shouldn't be taking that, or don't take that for too long. So then I looked into it and I was like, oh, they do have a point. I shouldn't be kind of on this for life. I should look to like find my minimum effective dose. So on Monday, I think it was, I didn't take any because I was like, oh, I felt better for 2 days. Let's try not taking any. And then on Tuesday, I felt bad again and I haven't felt good since. So maybe I was just an idiot and I just too quickly removed the medication. But yeah, today was some of the worst nausea I felt in a while. I think my fatigue is a little better. So hopefully that might be related to the fact I'm deloading though. So who knows? It's all a bit of an open kind of thing. And like you said, on the weekend I seemed better, and could we isolate that to being not the medication, but could it have been because, I don't know, I wasn't eating something, or I was away from something that could be causing, I don't know, it could be a stress. I know like nausea can be like a mental health thing, like you can have stress and anxiety and that can cause some issues. So I don't know at the moment, but yeah, the good thing is it can't be anything too serious. I say that like thinking I know that because I got my overall bloods done and like my kind of white blood cell counts and things like this weren't elevated, which leads me to think that my body isn't fighting away some like cancerous thing or something kind of really damaging to me. So yeah, it's minor, but it's always just, it's kind of like an injury at the moment. It is preventing me doing what I need to be doing.
Hopefully you'll find the solution very quickly, right? Because I mean, when you're going into a caloric deficit, I don't think that that you actually address the underlying issue, right? Because then it's just going down a different route, but not having actually addressed that issue. And then the next time you actually need to push that high again, will probably come back again. And then you are standing in front of the same issue another time, right? So it's better to get it actually like checked and try to get it solved now, so that in the future you know what to do, instead of then running into the same issue again and then kind of having weeks on end where you feel the way you do already now.
Yeah, it's very tempting. I've definitely had it before where I've booked in for an appointment with the doctors, and then by the time the appointment's due, because it's like a week or two down the line, I feel better, so then I cancel it. And in my mind, I'm like, I just don't want to know what it could have been, or it's gone, so I don't want to think about what the kind of long-term consequence could be. But you're completely right. It's the cutting may just be a kind of a bandage over the cut, not like a don't know, sewing it up. I can't think of a better analogy. Oh. So the weekend, let's talk about the weekend, because and like overall, I'm not dying. I don't feel kind of like I can still do my job. Like I can still function as a human, which is probably why the GP maybe didn't take it as seriously as maybe I want them to take it. Yeah. Because I do take training seriously, but it's not my job. It doesn't earn me a living, so I can still live.
And I mean, you brought it up, and I don't know how the health system in the UK is. I know that the NHS is a little bit under critique at the moment, right? And when it comes to like the German health system, you got like public insurance companies and also then private insurance companies. And because everything is right now, or most of the things are public at the moment, they are under certain regulations and have actually like massive pressure on themselves, because many clinics and many practitioners need to treat a certain amount of people per quarter or so, or what it is, and if they don't accomplish that, some of their budget will be actually decreased, and thus they are under massive pressure, so that they are actually getting the funds to still carry out what they are doing, right? And if they are not getting on that patient treatment amount, it's detrimental for them, right? And thus it becomes more like a factory work, where it's just like they see a patient for like 5 minutes, and that's all the time they have. Then they need to go to the next patient. So you can't always blame the GP then that they don't have the time for you. At least in Germany, that's the case. If you do, then go into a private insurance company and go to a private clinic, because then they have most of the time for you available, right? Because they are not limited to that threshold of patients they need to cover on a daily or weekly or quarterly basis or so. And also, like, GPs need to know so much. And when you go or look at the curriculum for a medical student, it's crazy what they need to learn. And unfortunately, when it comes to the educational system, once again, it always differs from country to country, but at least here in Germany, I look at it very, very critically, because the thing is that when it comes to learning, those kind of undergrads and maybe also a PhD kind of courses, you're not learning to learn for life and for practicing out what you have learned, but you're learning just for the exams. And after that, most of the people just forget what they actually learned. So I find that is the wrong way to go about education in it for itself. Education should be to prepare you for the task at hand and for the practical application, and not just like, okay, I need to learn all that material and all that stuff just for the exam. And after that, it doesn't even matter anymore, because I'm not practicing in that field anymore. Right? So, I think how it is at the moment is also not very much a good idea, because then it may end up like the way you've experienced it as well, that he becomes a jack of all trades, or tries to, and thus doesn't know that much anymore, or isn't up to par with the current scientific literature, which is most of the time also a big issue for practitioners as well, that they have such a busy schedule that they simply don't have the time to actually then look into the current scientific literature and be up to date when it comes to these kind of things as well. So yeah, I just want to also look at it from that perspective, because I don't think that it's always super easy to be a practitioner in that field.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I could see that because it's like talking through, and because one of the symptoms of like acid reflux and GERD is losing weight. And he asked me like, are you losing weight? And I'm like, like I would be, but I'm force feeding and taking in like liquid calories. And it's like, don't misconstrue that I'm not losing weight to me not having the issue because I'm like forcibly going around it. I think it's very much like personal trainers. This is why experience is so important, because
absolutely,
like if you've had a GP who's been doing it for years and years and years, they've seen it all maybe, or they've seen possibly someone who said similar things to you and weren't sure via textbooks what it was. That's invaluable. But you're completely right. Like this is why the GP then refers you like to a specialist who can help you more so. And that's why for us, we were like, right, we were kind of doing like bodybuilding and powerlifting for a period of time. And after a while, we're just like, we just want to do like physique sports, because the more we specialize in one area, the better you become at it. And yeah, if you spread yourself too thinly, you don't become amazing at anything. But that's what they need to be. That's why they do what they do. And I think they do have a similar system here, in that I think Charlotte said like they have a 6-minute time limit for every person, which is crazy. It's like you barely get to say hello and like actually talk through things, because I can imagine some patients really want to stay in there as well, and they kind of have to shoo them out a little bit.
It is unfortunate, but also I wouldn't like to change with the US, to be honest. With where everything is privatized, I don't think that this is a good thing. At least financially speaking, yes, it is a little bit more than under the control of companies, which is not always necessarily evil or so, or a bad thing. But in the end, I think that health should be open for the public, in my opinion. Because not otherwise it's a class system then. The ones who can afford it, they will always stay healthy and thus are agile and fresh. And those who can't, right, they will just suffer the consequences.
Yeah. So on a lighter note, what happened this weekend, Pascal? We don't need to talk too much about it, but it gives some kind of insights into the business, which is part of our life.
I don't know how much we want to reveal, actually. Do you want to talk about it?
We can at least say, I don't know how much we want to reveal. That's why I left it to you. So at least we can say as much as what we put on our stories. So we're working with a videographer, and we went to Nottingham to Chris Bailey, his studio. He's got a private studio in Nottingham that we rented out, and it's a really cool space, and it was a really fun weekend. Harry joined us as well, Coach Harry Smith, and we all did some form videos basically. So we're just doing lots of reps of different exercises and got those professionally filmed, and we're in the process of kind of creating a video library for our clients and future projects that we're working on. So very excited to release that. I already had a few messages like, when can I get these? Where can I get these? We'll probably release, I don't know how many, like 10 publicly or something. Put some on Instagram. But
and
they should
videos, be good. And the videos will be a little bit more for the advanced person and for the advanced trainee. So we are not going into depth about like the super basic and simplistic stuff, but we are more so making aware of the things that many people do wrong, and that may help you then in your execution of those exercises. So for example, common thing that is happening with the back is that too much momentum is being used, for example, that the shoulders aren't really contracted properly, and thus the back muscles aren't really working properly as well, that more of the arms are doing the job. Things like these we are more so covering, and not just like, okay, here's the squat, set the feet like 2 inches, I don't know, something like that, right? It's them kind of trying to find a good middle ground between being short enough so that when you're in the gym, you can watch it and know exactly how to do the movement, and you don't have to watch like a 10-minute, 30-minute video over every single detail, but descriptive enough so when you're watching it, you kind of can hear what the cues are for each of the kind of movements. So I think it's just it'll be a good resource, because I don't think there's necessarily one out there where it's just like someone doing the movement exactly how you want it performed with every kind of obvious cue mentioned. And if we need to go in further detail, it's always like, rather than doing a whole lengthy video with a client, you
talk it through with them, and then you can get to the details, or like have a format where that's available.
Yeah.
So that was super cool. That was fun. I really enjoyed that weekend, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. It was cold. I was always complaining about the cold,
things.
But yeah.
What happened? We had an Airbnb, which luckily me and Pascal missed, but the videographers and Harry got rained on basically.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was raining inside that apartment, even though it wasn't raining outside.
So a pipe burst and it just flooded everywhere. So then they were messed around massively, and in the end, like hours later into the night, into the next morning, they kind of they got hotels, and so we were in hotels, and then the power went at Bailey's studio, and it was, as you can imagine, it's a warehouse, so heating is like, it's not like a commercial gym
exactly.
or something.
So we had like these heaters that were electrically driven, and the fuse of the entire of most of the building actually came out. But the thing is that the box where the fuses were in a separate box that we didn't have access to. And Beatty or Chris was out of town, so you couldn't actually lock us into that thing. So yeah, we were just like stuck there with only a gas heater, like one gas heater for the entire thing, because the other one was empty after a while. And I mean, we needed to keep ourselves warm there.
But we'll be doing some more form videos at like another location at some point. And we're looking to just build this library. I know there's other kind of resources out there, but we kind of want our own. It's I think any coaches listening probably kind of want their own, or they always are trying to find
not
exercises.
Only that, and the thing that you brought up as well, that I think that we can definitely say, for example, the 3DMJ lifting library is much, much different, because that also covers a lot of the basics, and the videos are long, so not really what we are looking for, and not really what I feel helps the most of our audience. And this is nothing against 3DMJ. And then RP, for example, they have like lots of exercises, but these are just like 10-second short clips of Jared lifting in the gym, basically, right? Where it's also not really that helpful to understand what is truly going on and what you need to do, and common issues that are addressed and stuff like that.
I guess we're probably a middle ground between the two-ish. But yeah, we'll put our spin on it, and hopefully I'm excited to see them come out, because the hardest thing I found, and you were good at this, I don't know if this is because you were a model in the past, but I struggled being a model. I was just wanting to laugh. So sometimes we filmed it and it was like good, and I was like, did I pull a funny face? Because I was trying to hold in a laugh. And I'm really bad at that. Sometimes I'll just laugh at the most inappropriate occasions, because I'm just I have the giggles and they're gone. So oh well. Cool. So it was fun.
Let's move over to questions then. And we start off with our man, the supporter, Andrew Potacek,
the veiny Australian.
He said, also, you guys do say my last name right. All right. Potacek. So you say Potacek, and I will now also think that is Potacek instead of Potacek. So I just say Potacek now. Supporter. Is it of any benefit to wear a hoodie to sweat more during cardio or a weight session? I find the pros only do it to hide their body composition, body for competition reasons, but does it help to burn more calories?
No, absolutely not. As far as I'm kind of aware of it, I think it's more, people view it as like a weight loss solution, because yes, if you sweat more, you lose more fluids, you lose more water, you acutely lose more weight. So I have seen that used as a strategy for like weight cutting, to like sweat out. But you're not burning more calories by actually getting hotter in a hoodie. The only way I'm thinking maybe it works is if you are so hot that the body has to work overdrive to try and cool you down, and you burn some extra calories that way. But I just don't really see that as a valid rationale behind it.
So I think we've actually covered that like a year or 2 years ago, when we've talked about that there was a yoga studio right next to me when I was living in a different area in Berlin. Hot yoga, that was the thing, like, I don't know, 5 years ago or something like that, right? 40 degrees, you were sweating a lot, and people thought that this is the thing to work out in a hot environment. Thing is that it turns out that you actually burn more calories when you're working out in a cold environment, because the body then has to work even harder to actually keep your body temperature high, which is much more important than in the long term, right? And other than that, when it comes to like sweating, the more you sweat, the more likely it is that you cool off, right? And then the water on your body that is why you're sweating, so that the water on your body is then actually cooling you down. And if you want to burn more calories, I would even suggest like going into, I don't know, a minus 40 degrees environment and do the cardio there.
I'm just thinking, when you're in prep, cardio becomes almost nice sometimes because you get warm, and it's like the only time you get warm. Getting a sweat on during prep, maybe that's why they end up doing it in prep, because they're just so cold all the time. So I don't know.
Very early. Or it's just like the hardcore hoodie crowd.
Yeah. And I do know a time where people correlated the amount you sweat with the amount of energy you've burned, or like, what's it called? Sweat is fat leaving the body. Like you can lose fat through sweat, but you can lose it through your breath, like poo, piss. Like it just has to leave the body. But yeah, anyway, enough of that question. I can't think of a good rationale, because I can, like, if I think of like tilapia thins the skin, I'm like, well, at least tilapia is like protein, low fat, like I can get that. Or like, I don't know, they go on the stepper a lot of the time, don't they? And I guess it's like it burns a lot of calories in a short amount of time, potentially. It's hard, but I can't think of any actual reason apart from maybe they're cold to wear the hoodie.
Don't know. Anyway, in regards to moving on to the next question, it is from Muffins. And currently in a prolonged diet phase, 12 to 15 weeks in length, training for hypertrophy in the same manner as I would if I were in a masking phase. Very good. Personally, as I get into my second or third mesocycle, I struggle to add sets for my bigger compound lifts and generally add them to smaller lifts. For example, area progression in my bench press, but area set progression increases for dumbbell presses. As you guys go deeper into your cutting phases, do your big compound movements take a hit? And how do you prefer to make your overload progression during this time?
So I think it makes complete sense that he struggles more with the compound movements in a cutting phase to progress those, just because we know from minimum effective volume is slightly raised during a dieting phase because we don't have the surplus, or we are in a deficit, so muscle protein breakdown is lower. So to keep MPS up and raised and to make sure we're growing, or at least not kind of seeing muscle loss, we have a bit more training. So MEV is higher than your MRV because we don't have the surplus, we're in a deficit again. Our ability to recover is lower, so the window between MEV and MRV is smaller, so your progressions through the weeks are going to be less, or you deload earlier. Both are options. So it makes sense that just progression within a dieting phase is harder anyway, and then even more sense on a compound movement that it's harder because these are going to take more recovery reserves. And then it makes complete sense that maybe you're not recovered enough to add sets to a compound movement, but maybe an isolation movement, because maybe a compound, say it adds like, I don't know, 1 total unit of stress. A isolation movement maybe is 0.5, and so maybe you can add 0.5, but you can't do 1 because 1 would push you over the edge. So that makes complete sense to me, just from that standpoint. And I've seen that of clients as well, where they just can't kind of progress like they usually could with their big compound lifts. I will say for me, it's been so long. It's been since like 2017 now, since I've done a prolonged dieting phase, to actually be able to reflect and comment on this. And I don't think I did my programming the best way during that contest prep. I did shitloads of volume. I think it was my first kind of getting to grips with MRV and volume landmarks, and I just got very good at doing volume. And what I will say actually is, when you get further and deeper into a diet, sometimes you get weaker, and then that can sometimes open up volume capabilities because it's less fatiguing. And sometimes you become just very good at recovering because you become a bit endurance based, like when you train with high repetitions for a long period of time, maybe you do some cardio and you just seem to recover very quickly. So I think there can become a time, although the window's definitely small, like getting smaller, there can become times where you just become like, because you can't overload yourself successfully, you don't become as fatigued. But that's quite deep into like a contest prep, I think, where that might happen.
Oh. I think it always depends on the severity of the caloric deficit as well, because that definitely adds to the overall fatigue. And when fatigue rises, the motor unit recruitment actually decreases as well. So when it then comes to being deep into a cutting phase, 12 to 14 weeks, the fatigue will be most of the time actually quite high, unless you've actually dieted very, very slowly, which I don't assume that you did, muffins. So when you're then going in there and you're trying to actually do the same amount of load that you've done before for the same amount of sets, it's most of the time not going to work, because the overall recruitment of motor units will be actually decreased. And thus then something like the MEV to MRV range will also be narrower. So you have to be a little bit more cautious with those kind of progression schemes. And what I would then always do the longer you are in a cut is actually be more and more cautious with actually set progression. Because at sometimes, what do we know about set progression? It is a means to actually then get the volume in that is required for hypertrophy. We kind of know that a minimum threshold of intensity is needed for hypertrophy, and from there on, it's probably then volume progression. However, there is a certain threshold after which we then can't recover from that is actually lower in a cutting phase. And we also know that in a cutting phase, it is more so unlikely that we are then gaining a lot of muscle mass. So why would you then train to a high level of MRV and have an aggressive approach to then set progression? I would then rather be more so towards the end of MEV most of the time instead of closer to MRV all the time. So of course we would like to be at MAV most of the time, but the thing is that on a spectrum, let's say where left is, or now you watch it on the right side, on one spectrum there is MEV, on one spectrum there's MRV. I would always then favor more so in direction of MEV, because then you are on the safe side. Then you don't take a hit, you're not running into the risk of then exponentially high risk of injury, and also you know that you can meet those targets for workout. If you're too fatigued because you have done too much, then the performance will actually decrease, and thus it will be very hard to then catch up again. And then you are running after, like, I don't know, a goal that is not attainable for you anymore because the fatigue is just too high and you can't really get rid of that fatigue anymore. Hope that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, happy with that.
Cool. So Callan Tico, is there any problem with a wider variety of exercises and less sets versus a lower variety and more sets? 9 example.
I see what you're saying.
Okay. I think he meant to say, for example, not 9 example. For example, 2 sets versus... no, now I know. 9 exercises times 2 sets versus 4 exercises times 4 to 5 sets for a muscle group. Volume equated though, just for boredom and because it's more fun to have more exercises. So yeah.
So I always like to take, and actually I'll take this from Mike, but I have found myself doing it anyway, but he recently said this, I think it was in the latest podcast, which will have been released by now, where he was like, he just likes to take psychology out of it sometimes. Like when we're just looking at optimality from just a standpoint of taking out like boredom, preferences, what on paper is best, because you take into account the other stuff afterwards. So in terms of what I think is best without taking into preferences, I think there is a sweet spot for number of exercises used. So I do think you want to use, and you don't want to use like just one exercise for a muscle group. Likewise, I think there's an upper cap where you don't want to use like every exercise for a muscle group. You typically hear the guys that do like chest day and they do like incline, decline, flat, incline, decline, flat, like fly, bench, dumbbells, like they do everything. It's like, okay, so you've done like 12 exercises for your chest. If you're doing 1 set, that's still a lot of volume for your chest. So I think there's a sweet spot. And I think for most people, that will be 2 to 4 exercises, depending on the frequency. If you're doing a higher frequency, like you're training your legs 4 times a week, training your quads 4 times a week, maybe you could have 4 different ones. But yeah, still, that's within like the 2 to 4 range. I can't see going over 4 exercises making much sense. Maybe if you're training biceps 6 times a week, but still, I think you could do better just keeping 4. And the reason for that is I think if you go much over, say 4, you end up spreading your volume quite thin. And so you don't really get to grips within a session with an exercise. You kind of, after a couple of sets, maybe 3 sets, that's when it starts to really start feeling like you're doing good work with that movement. I know for me, sometimes my second set feels better than, well, quite often my second set feels better than my first set, and then maybe my third set feels even better. You've warmed up for the movement, you've kind of got into the flow state, you've got that good mind-muscle connection. So I think if you're doing just like 2 sets, or like you're really sparingly doing a lot and like moving between movements, you are kind of in some ways confusing the body. It's having to reconnect with the movement. You're having to re-warm up for a movement. You aren't getting that great mind-muscle connection. So I feel like it's a bit inefficient, but also not best for mind-muscle connection. And then you're also taking away from potential future variety, or novelty in future. So like if you're using every single movement there is for chest, or most of them, where do you go when one of them is feeling a bit off, or whatever happens in that regard? And again, for kind of psychology, if you're going to take that into account, it could eventually become where you're just like, oh my God, I've got nothing new I can kind of put into my program. Maybe you can change rep ranges or something along those lines. But I think the biggest issue for me is you spread yourself too thinly. You're having to warm up. It becomes quite inefficient to warm up and get to grips with lots of exercises. You also don't get the kind of great mind muscle connection and kind of flow with an exercise. But I do think you could do too little. You do want to hit the muscle group from a variety of angles, give it a bit of an opportunity to rest, and then kind of overloads a different portion of the muscle. So I wouldn't kind of limit yourself to like 1 or 2 exercises necessarily, but I think there is an upper limit as well. So I tend to cap it at 2 to 4 for most muscle groups.
I have a lot to say. So let me gather my thoughts. So
you have to expand on mine.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think that your general recommendation is a good one. However, I think that there are a couple of caveats to it. First and foremost, I'm someone who doesn't need a lot to actually build a good mind-muscle connection for the session. I can go in there and I have a great mind-muscle connection from the first set onwards. And I don't then need like 3 sets to then feel the connection with the muscle. And I have someone like Z, for example, he is the same. He needs like, for example, 2 sets for his hamstrings, and that's all he needs for in one lower body day, for example, right? Because he gets so much out of those single sets. That being said, it also then, of course, depends on the overall split. So right now I'm running an upper, lower split. In that regard, I have like two exercises per body part for that day. So chest, two exercises, horizontal press, vertical press, and for the pulling, the same deal, horizontal pull, vertical pull. And there I like, so spread over the entire week is then equaling a total amount of 6 exercises per body part, right? So it's falling right in the middle between his example, between like 4 exercises to 9 exercises. And for those though, I start off with like 4 sets at the beginning of the mesocycle per session, which then you can do the math, starts out at around 12 sets per body part at the first week of the mesocycle, and then it progresses from there on. So when then someone is doing though a push-pull legs, then the equation actually changes, where I'm then liking to incorporate like also 3 exercises, but on that single day instead of like only 2 exercises, so that it is falling more so in the rep range of 6 to 8, an exercise that is suited for that. For example, bench press, then an exercise that is suited to be in the rep range of 8 to 12, for example, and then an exercise that is falling into the rep range of 10 to 15, because I don't want someone to be doing bench press and then something like cable flies, and the cable flies would fall into the range of like 8 to 12. It's, for me at least, a little bit too heavy of a load to actually get a good connection and also a good stimulus out of the cable flies, for example. That's why I like to split it up more so, where the majority of the volume and the majority of the intensity comes from those heavy compound lifts. And then when I'm progressing throughout the mesocycle, for example, I'm not adding like just randomly sets to each and every single exercise, so that it's then a but I don't know, mesocycle week number 4, that it would be something like 4 sets for the bench press, 4 sets for the other exercise, 4 sets for the cable flies, but it would also be like 5 sets for the bench press, 3 sets for the, I don't know, incline dumbbell press, and 2 sets for the cable flies, so that this cable fly machine actually really just acts like an isolation volume exercise to then also very much create that kind of metabolite environment, get that pump sensation, and also work on that higher repetition range.
I was trying to think, maybe for my back, I'm trying to think how many, because I've been running an upper lower. I was trying to think how many exercises did I have? Because I had a bent over row, had a machine row, had a one arm row, had lat pull downs and assisted pull ups. So that was 5. But yeah, I think a good point that you added there was if your frequency is higher, probably you're going to have more exercises. And I think for the more actually in general, if for the maybe the more complex the muscle, but the more volume the muscle can handle, the higher the frequency, and likely then higher the exercise variety as well. Because I guess for hamstrings, I don't imagine, like, if he had many exercises, he'd be doing like 1 set each because he needs full volume.
And he's even saying, like, from those RDLs, right? It's just like two sets in the first week or so. He's already complaining about massive DOMs like 2 days after still, right? Because he is so good at then recruiting those motor units and also thus damaging, metabolically damage those muscle groups. And thus he doesn't need that much. I think, though, it must be said, and that's why I said it's a general good recommendation, because I don't think that many people are at that level to then fully recruit those muscle, the motor units or those muscle fibers. It's like here in the last podcast with Mike Isertel and Paul Carter, where they said so many people, they need to learn that skill of targeting a muscle group. And this is something that we brought up as well in the past, especially with the back exercises when you're pulling, because you can't see it, it's so hard. So many people simply don't know how to target the back musculature, and that is a skill that needs development, and that comes over time. And when I look back now in hindsight, I always think, like, how could I have trained that way? I think, why wasn't I able to always feel my back that way? But it is a skill that needs to develop. It is a neurological thing that just teaches you how to connect with those muscle groups, and also just the hypertrophic aspect of it, that if you don't really have that much muscle mass, there aren't really as many motor units that are recruited, and thus it gets more and more harder for you to actually then feel a muscle group, right? So it's a skill that needs to be developed, and that is also so hard to then teach people and clients to then say, like, okay, don't just go through the range of motion here. I can see that you're doing a bench press, but try to really feel the chest, right? Now it's so easy to say, because now we have developed a skill where we can feel that muscle group. I think it can still be much, much more efficient and much more perfectionized. But the thing is that we kind of have an understanding already. When I look back like 4 or 5 years ago, if you told me, like, try to now do a row and really feel the back musculature, I probably couldn't have done it. I thought I was there. I thought that this is the way it's supposed to feel, but it actually wasn't.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Cool. Moving on to the next one. So where are we? Tom Paul. Would you expect to see any performance loss during a minicut?
Good question. So, in my experience from working with clients and through going through mini cuts myself, I don't tend to see a performance drop, maybe until the final week. And that's when it starts. Because, like we know, mini cuts are short, sharp, aggressive. You're in a big calorie deficit, generally training with like your typical first week hypertrophy volume, first week of your mesocycle hypertrophy volume, so minimum effective volume, which becomes maintenance volume for the mini cut. So it's not a high amount of volume, but it's still overloading. And so fatigue accumulates rapidly and exponentially even. So the first week, you're coming straight out of a mass. So the first week, you're probably feeling actually pretty okay in training. But the week after that, because the deficit is so large and you're losing so much, you're becoming so glycogen depleted. I think every week, the risk of kind of losing performance is getting greater and greater. And I think if you are overzealous in your first week, you could quite easily in your final weeks kind of start really struggling to hold on to performance. And so I don't think I've ever seen anyone drop performance necessarily, but more so maintain performance. So it's just similar to a cut, like the chances of losing performance are greater, but even greater in a mini cut. So it's just being very careful about that. And that's why we don't kind of push volume either. So I wouldn't say it's expected. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like a terrible thing if it happens because it's such a short-term thing. If you're losing performance like in the first week, then something's really gone wrong, or the second week potentially. But if it's like if you're in week 3 or week 5, like of a mini cut, and you've kind of maintained performance or seen a small drop off, I wouldn't start like worrying about it. If you're doing everything else right, you're losing at a good rate of pace, and you're not doing excessive amount of volume, you're maybe leaving some reps in reserve at the earlier half of your mesocycle, I think you're okay. So
I've seen it personally, and the thing is, it is like you said, like it also happens in week 3 and week 4 when the fatigue actually accumulates to a very high extent. And it's what we said here, I think, or covered in the first question or the second question. And once fatigue is rising, then your and carbohydrates are also very, very sparse, then the recruitment of high threshold motor units is actually then a little bit impaired. And thus, this can possibly have an impact on just like the overall performance, especially when it's a heavier compound lift. You don't really see it that much on those isolationish kind of movements, more so with those heavy compound lifts, especially something like pressing compound lifts. But as long as you're not then losing also on those isolationist kind of movements, I don't think that this is very much something that you need to worry about. I think that it's only more so a neurological thing, a temporary neurological thing that is happening due to the harsh environment and quickly comes back right after you come out of the mini cut.
Cool.
Yeah. We're good on time. So John Williams says, is there any reason to really push hard in training during a cut? Since you generally won't be gaining mass anyway, would it be better just to cruise and save the hard effort for when you are massing? Does all of the grinding away with no caloric support have any sort of detrimental effect on later gains? I'm just smiling because that is basically what we covered earlier in this episode, where I said like, okay, the range of MEV to MRV stay more so on the lower side of things because you're not expecting to make massive improvements in the hypertrophic gains. So you don't want to very much overreach because that could possibly be detrimental, but always being more on the lower side of things will guarantee you that you are still able to perform well and kind of at least maintain your performance and thus keeping the gains.
Yeah, I think it's so funny. I think he's definitely got a point. I don't agree with you kind of cruising necessarily, because there is definitely, like, you still need to train for muscle growth, but just realize you're in a hampered position for that. And so you aren't going to be able to recover as well. But yeah, because I do think he still has a point, because I do see people being like, oh, you have to fight like when you're in a deficit, and like you have to fight to hold on to tissue and stuff. And I think sometimes that definitely has a place, but I think you can take it too far where you add just extra stress, extra kind of fatigue that you just really didn't need to do. And when we know kind of about volume and how important that is, if you're adding just tons of intensity and therefore a load of fatigue with it, and you could have actually just done a bit more volume and secured more tissue and stressed less about it, then I think that's probably the way you want to go. Now we know that's kind of the way to go. So yeah, it's a funny one though. And yeah, we basically have had 3 very similar questions.
Yeah. So just to give another example, and this is completely out of the top of my head here. When I'm starting, like I brought up the example of 12 sets for chest, for example, right? In a gaining phase. And then you are progressing to something like 20 sets at the end of the mesocycle. when you are in a cutting phase, why not start off with 12 set, maybe a little bit higher, because the MEV probably comes up as well to hold on to tissue. So maybe start off with a 13 and only progress to something like 15 or 16 towards the end of the mesocycle, right? Thus, you're not accumulating as much fatigue throughout the weeks, because you're not just ramping up the volume, but you're progressing a little bit. That is still probably enough to see somewhat of a progression there. And you should be golden not to pound yourself into the ground and not progressing at all. And yeah, I think this is probably where you will then want to move in while you are in a cutting phase.
Yeah, and I think you already mentioned it, but just to emphasize, when you're in a cutting phase, you don't want to aim, like you might aim for overreaching during it. It might hit you anyway because you're in a cutting phase, and you may become overreached because that just happens because fatigue builds. But you don't want to kind of aim for it the same way you might in a mass phase, because you just don't. Sure, you might be deloading, going into a diet break, but that's not the same as being in a surplus for many weeks and then a surplus during your kind of deload. So I wouldn't generally recommend trying and aiming to overreach during a cut.
And if you're truly overreaching, I think that maybe sometimes a deload in a deficit isn't even enough to fully recover then. And thus, that's where I'm coming from with then trying to always err on the side of safety in a cutting phase, because once again, it's like a normal deload setting. If you're going too hard, then you are not dissipating the accumulated fatigue. If you are going too hard still, once again, but you keep the volume on the lower side of things, right? And you are sticking to an area of like 3, let's say, instead of 3 to 5, then it isn't hard enough in comparison to the overall progression throughout a mesocycle to really induce hypertrophic signaling. And thus, you don't get either one of those both worlds, right? So you really want to make sure to actually let the accumulated fatigue dissipate. And once you are in a cutting phase, if you're then overreaching, right, and you're going too hard, then the accumulated fatigue just carries over into the deload, and then you're just standing there. You can't really dissipate the accumulated fatigue because you aren't eating enough to then also fuel the recovery portion of things, and then you go into the next mesocycle with that fatigue still sticking around, and thus it can possibly be detrimental, right? And you don't have anything to really gain out of it. It's like we're always saying that if you're adding sets, it's not that you are getting so much more out of that. Going from 2 sets to 4 sets won't give you double the amount of gains, right? It's just a marginal thing. If you know that, and you are in a cutting phase, is it then really worth to push it up there? Probably not, because it's just like accumulating exponential fatigue, just as Steve rightly put it out already. So in a gaining phase, it may be worth to add sets just to the sheer benefits of that can have, but along with that, fatigue is accumulating. But while you are in a gaining phase, you can take care of that accumulated fatigue much easier. While you are in a cutting phase, it comes at a much higher cost and price to actually add sets and progress in that kind of fashion. So always be a little bit more cautious with that once you are in a cutting phase.
Perfect.
Cool.
Any time for one?
Yeah, last question. So the name I couldn't pronounce, and I'm sorry once again that I totally forgot where you were coming from, because I know that you said it in the comment section like the last time that Hungary? I don't know.
You're just hungry.
Don't know your name. Once again, I'm terribly sorry because he actually said it and I forgot about it. So found myself unable to get to the gym for 4 days straight in the middle of my week 3 out of 4 of my mass meso due to some unforeseen circumstances. How would you proceed on such occasion? Just continue your meso as normal or use that as a deload and start over? Slight context, no super high competitive aspirations. I'm just a regular gym loving dude.
Good question. I think given he's just a general gym loving dude, I think either way would be fine anyway for anyone, like to use that as a deload period. Maybe if after 4 days you haven't dissipated all the fatigue you've accumulated after 3 weeks. It's questionable whether or not you're kind of ready to go into a mesocycle immediately. If I was just not to overthink this question, I would just say, just get into your week 4, and you can probably actually, because you've dropped some fatigue, like do more than what you could have beforehand. Maybe even you could extend the mesocycle into a week 5. Now you've done that. So that's the way I'd probably attack it.
Yeah, that's probably what I would do as well, to just, instead of now doing 4 weeks, 4 days is not very much a long time for rest days. Like 2 days can be absolutely sufficient for many people. Sometimes just due to unforeseen circumstances, it can even extend to 3 days. And I even think that 3 days away from the gym is not really that long of a time, right? 4 days gets to the point where you are probably dissipating a lot of fatigue already. Is it enough that is kind of the same or equal to an entire deload? I don't think so. But that is where the rationale then comes in, where you then can probably go into week 4. You are a little bit more recovered, thus you can push it a little bit harder in week 4 than you would have normally. And then just extend it by another week and see how you feel. Once you are then in week 5 and you feel like, all right, now it's slowly time for a deload, go ahead to take the deload after week 5. If you still have something in the tank, go for another week and then take the deload. Then it would equal out to be like 3 weeks on, 4 days off, 3 weeks on, deload.
Cool.
Like in the worst or the best scenario.
And a side note, so many people ask on Instagram, at least in my question box, I get at least 3 questions every time. Like last time I did it, I got 3, and I know I get this asked every time. What's the difference between taking days off the gym versus doing a deload? Can I not just take 4 days off the gym instead of doing a deload? And I get frustrated just because I feel like I've answered this so many times, and in reality, I don't think it's a huge difference if you just think about it. But like you said, I don't think 4 days off is because, first of all, I don't think having days off the gym, having a week off the gym is not more deloading than having a deload week in the gym. There's studies showing you dissipate more fatigue by going to the gym and doing light sessions rather than just not doing anything at all. I know that's counterintuitive to a lot of people, but it's like going for a walk when you've got like a slight twinge on your knee rather than just resting it all day or something like that. So I don't know. It just comes up so often, and I've just got it in my head. I have to do an infographic on it so that I can just share that every time people ask, because it comes up so often. And actually, something really interesting, I don't know where I heard it. I think it was Mike talked about James Krieger and his research review and said how deload weeks are not lost time at all. Like even if you are taking a deload week like early, in fact, because of the like resensitization that you get from a deload week, it's probably benefiting you more by taking it. So all these people that are trying to not do deloads, kind of cut their deload short, I think it's going to be counterproductive. Everything irks me to think that way, or not irks me. Everything makes me think that way, at least. I don't know. It's just a rant that came into my head because so many people are trying to avoid deloading, and I don't get it. Well, I do get it. But
absolutely. And the same thing I had today. One client of mine asked me like, okay, I have that guy who doesn't really believe in primer phases and maintenance phases and thinks that they are a waste of time. And in it for itself, as we already rightly pointed out, so in the primer phase ebook, it's not a mandatory phase to be doing, right? Maintenance phases is not something that you have to do. But I think that there are inherent benefits to actually be doing that, and many things that actually speak for it. And the same applies to something like a deload. A primer phase is basically just a prolonged deload with a little bit of harder training, though, spread over a longer period of time. And I think that once you've done that, and once you think about the rationale behind it, it becomes clear why something like that may be plausible to actually be doing. Once again, studies haven't really supported that in the sense of a maintenance period of training, but just from a logical perspective of how the body adapts and works and all that kind of stuff, and also from anecdotes, especially from anecdotes. And even Paul Carter has brought it up, right, in the podcast. He said it himself, which was that
was cool.
When I was listening to that, I was like, holy shit, yes, this is exactly what I've been thinking as well, and where the idea of the prima phase comes from. And he didn't hear from Mike or so, at least not in that podcast, where he basically said, like, I don't know what it is, but there's something about if you always train balls to the wall, at some point you're just hitting a wall and you're not growing. And then you just have to reconsider what you're doing. Maybe take a lighter block and then go back into training again, and then you're growing again. I don't know what it is, right? And this is actually coming from someone who is mainly basing his experience on anecdotal experience. So, I found that actually quite interesting as well to hear.
Yeah, I think the primer phase or maintenance periods, they don't have rationale for people who aren't pushing it hard in the gym.
Yes.
They're for people who are looking to maximize their growth and therefore need to pull back. It's like if you're pushing your car to its limit, like you have to take it in. Whereas if you're just going tootling along really slow pace, yeah, sure, you might be able to do that a while. But the people doing it maximally, like they're going to maximize their growth in the long term as well in that sense. So I can see why people might be like, they're just consistently grinding very slowly. They're progressing very slowly and they don't need it necessarily. Maybe they keep their volume very low all the time. But for us who we're pushing the bounds, like we need that cool off period, and that makes sense in a periodized fashion. And even like obviously Brad Schoenfeld uses like a similar phase he has like a strength phase within the Max Muscle Plan, and he talked about that on the podcast as well. There's a reason, there's a rationale behind it. So it's hard though, because it's not like you won't progress if you don't take it. It's just like you're just slowing down your progress. And for me, it always hurts knowing that I could have done something that's on paper easier and got better results than like pushing harder and getting worse results. It's the same with diets. Like it has the same.
Yeah. And I mean, when it comes to the primer phase and particularly, you're not training and you're still going in there, and you are, especially like when you're progressing in the way we've laid it out, you're progressing from an area of 4 to something like an area of 1 or so, right? And while it is only like low volume in quotation marks on paper, it is still very, very hard training. When you're doing like 3 sets in the 3 to 6 repetition range, holy shit, with something like back squats or so, this is, when you're strong, that is already very, very exhaustive. And then this in conjunction with other heavy compound lifts in that rep range, that is hard training. You can't tell me that it isn't.
And the good thing is, once you've taken one, you probably don't need one for like another 6 months or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you can go balls to the wall again.
Exactly. Cool.
I'm good.
We are coming up on time.
Else.
Yeah.
When this comes out, it will be Black Friday and Cyber Monday would have passed.
That's true. I mean, today is Cyber Monday.
Wait,
when it comes out.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Sorry. This comes out on a Monday, doesn't it? Do we have a Cyber Monday deal?
Yes, we do. So Black Friday sale, and I mean Black Friday, Cyber Weekend, Cyber Monday, it's all kind of the same, right? So there's still some discount on our website for all the products for 20% off. So
not coaching though.
No, not coaching. But that's nothing on our website, right? I mean, on our website you can apply for the coaching, but it's not something that you purchase on our website. So
because we're not getting into that.
No. Cool.
Right, guys, thank you. By the way, I've ran a discount for coaching before until I realized that wasn't something I should be doing. I was like a year into I'll stop blabbing. Guys,
cool.
Thank you for listening.
Cheers, guys.